What is human trafficking and what can we do to fight it? Is it idealistic or naive to think that enjoying delicious food and coffee can help end modern day slavery? We'll be talking about that with our local, just have to start that over because I realized I wrote here, not hero. Also, I should tell you before I restart it that I changed your bio to make it a little shorter because I wasn't going to read it.
Yeah, totally fine. Don't mind at all.
Okay. And here we go again.
Wait. Oh, you're recording. Okay, go ahead.
That would be so bad. I got to the end of yesterday's podcast and was like, oh, what if? But we did. Okay, here we go for real. Third time's the charm. What is human trafficking and what can we do to fight it? Is it idealistic or naive to think that enjoying delicious food and coffee can help end modern day slavery? We'll be talking with local hero, visionary, and the woman people.com called an angel on today's episode of Theology on Air. Well, welcome back to Theology on Air. I am Sarah Stone, the Outreach Director for Young Adults at MDPC and one of your moderators today. I'm joined, as usual, by Evan McClanahan, pastor over at First Lutheran. How are we doing?
Doing good.
Great.
And next time we have a Theology on Tap event about whether angels exist or something.
Yeah, we'll have to have Erica.
Show up.
Done. It's done.
A first-hand perspective. So we are also joined by our very special guest today, Erica Raggett, founder and executive director of A Second Cup, Houston's first and only nonprofit coffee shop working to fight human trafficking in the city. With degrees in animal science and ecology and systematic biology from Cal Poly, Erica taught with Teach for America and then Yes College Prep. And there she was also the Dean of Instruction and District Content Specialist. And then she took that entrepreneurial spirit and launched the nonprofit that we are going to be talking about today. So welcome, Erica. We're so glad to have you.
Well, thanks for having me.
As those of you that listen to us know, we are a ministry born out of Theology on Tap, which is an event that we do for young adults here in Houston, where we talk about all kinds of fascinating cultural and philosophical and spiritual, theological issues all over delicious craft beer. And Theology on Air talks about some of those same things every week. So welcome back. And we are also streaming sort of live on KPFT. And so if you're enjoying listening on the radio without commercials, as always, go to kpft.org to learn more about giving because it's listener supported. So I think we've got all the housekeeping stuff out of the way. So let's just dive in and hear a little bit, Erica, about your story of kind of how you even came to in this place that you are today. Give us the background.
So I'm originally from California, and I'm on the very cusp of millennial, and so I'm like at the very old end of millennial.
You're an elder millennial.
Yes, that's right. But I think there's kind of like this spirit in this age group of like wanting to use whatever you do to do good in the world. Mm-hmm. So I think about like all of these social entrepreneurial things that are happening in our time. People want to buy from companies who are doing good. There's just kind of that spirit, and I feel like that was something that was kind of just that we grew up with. And so we had this imagining that we could do something good for the world. And so I was not an exception for that. Like I was just like everyone else and thinking that whatever I did, I wanted to do good. And so I went to school with a major in animal science and ecology and systematic biology, which is a perfect segue into coffee. Or not. But envisioning myself as somebody who would do something with environmental science and tried to help companies do good in the world. And so as I kind of went through my college experience, I learned about an organization called Teach for America that was really focusing on the educational inequities around the country. And I was so moved by the mission to ensure that all students had a good education, because knowing that education is such a stepping stone into the next part of life. And so I got involved in that, and that's what moved me to Houston. And I was in education. I taught middle school science for a number of years. And during that time, I learned about human trafficking. And so I attended a church called the Houston Vineyard, and we do something every year called Advent Conspiracy, which is just a time during Advent to really focus on giving back and slowing down and really thinking about the purpose of Advent. And part of that is that we explore other organizations who are really doing good in the world. And so I learned about an organization called Love 146, and they are an anti-trafficking group primarily focused on child sex trafficking around the world. And they have safe houses in a number of places. They work on prevention education in schools. But I remember sitting there in my chair listening to this information session about child sex trafficking around the world and just being blown away, and so sad and heartbroken and almost like just angry that like it was happening and that I had never known about it or heard about it. And after walking out of there, I couldn't shake it. I just kept thinking about it, tried to learn more. I read books. I got involved with other organizations here in Houston. I watched documentaries, and I just really couldn't shake it. I kept thinking about it and kept feeling like there's something that I want to do about it. And what compounded that really was that I was working in an under-resourced community, in a school, in an under-resourced community. I was working with students who were in this primary age group that's targeted for trafficking in the US. I was working with a lot of students who were from immigrant households. And all of these factors kind of added up to make them a more vulnerable population to trafficking. And so I knew that, like, sitting in my classroom were students that were on the, on the higher end of the vulnerability spectrum, and just thinking about the fact that they could be trafficked, but then like, what would their life be like after something like that happened to them? Like, they're middle schoolers. They don't have a full educational history. They wouldn't have any work experience. They wouldn't have developed these networks that a lot of us enjoy when we're thinking about how to move forward through life. There would be so many barriers stacked against them to be able to overcome that and really thrive in the world. And so I just kept feeling there was something else that I wanted to do. And so after a while, and I'll pause there and say, I have also really loved coffee shops for as long as I can remember. I've lived in a number of different places around the US, and I love the local coffee shop scene. I think that it is unique in the way that it can like bring community together. Like, you might sit next to somebody that you would never sit next to, and you'll probably mention something about their coffee, or that some conversation is sparked that wouldn't otherwise be sparked. And I think there's just a lot of opportunity for coffee shops to be a real force in generating community. So I had this love of coffee shops. I had this like hatred for human trafficking and like this desire to do something about it. And one day those ideas kind of merged together in my head, and I was like, what if I started a coffee shop that worked to fight human trafficking? And so I started writing down some ideas and started talking to people about it. I talked to a couple of other anti-trafficking groups that were like, oh yeah, that's a good idea. And so I just moved forward, got a board of directors, and we were mobile for about 4.5 years. So we would pack up my little Mazda with all of our coffee equipment. We'd set up, serve coffee, talk to people about human trafficking, pack it back up in my car, and we would do it again.
Wow.
And then we opened our brick and mortar in the Heights in October of 2015. So we're coming upon our 5th birthday as the brick and mortar, which is really exciting. That's how we got started.
so many questions, but there's I laugh because on the ceiling, there's a tiny little mistake in the paint that our group helped paint. And so every time I see it, I'm like, we did that, but we made a tiny mistake. It's like the tiniest little bit of black paint. I'm like, oh, we came that day and helped. It's cute.
Those rafters were really hard to paint.
They weren't, yeah. But it's fantastic. The space is great. It's wonderful. But maybe before we get into how the heck does like a coffee shop fight human trafficking, because that's kind of different. Maybe you can define human trafficking, because I don't think people throw that term around, and some people think it has to do with like sex workers, which maybe it does some, but it's broader. Give us like a picture of what that is.
Yeah, so basically human trafficking is the use of force, fraud, or coercion to obtain some kind of labor or commercial sexual act. And so traffickers can use things like violence or manipulation or false promises of jobs or false promises of relationships or threats or anything like that to obtain the labor that they want or the commercial sexual act that they want. And so somebody who is doing the labor or doing the Act would be considered a victim of human trafficking.
Okay. And so you mentioned earlier something about the middle schoolers you were working with. Who is getting trafficked? I mean, and how's that happening?
Yeah, so typically, I will say that human trafficking can happen to anybody. It can happen to boys, it can happen to girls, it can happen to women, it can happen to men, it can happen to anybody of any race or ethnicity or religion or socioeconomic status. It can happen to anyone. However, typically it happens to individuals who are living more in the margins. So somebody who is living in an under-resourced community, somebody who is who has a history of exploitation, or somebody who has a history of substance or sexual abuse, or somebody who has a learning disability, or has inadequate support systems. And so, you know, like I think of like my kids, we are a middle-class family, we're Caucasian, we know what our kids are doing all the time. While my husband and I both work jobs, we're home when our kids are home. We, you know, my kids are very little, but they would not be highly vulnerable. A highly vulnerable child is one who is oftentimes living in poverty, oftentimes have parents who are working multiple jobs to make ends meet, and so they're maybe not home, maybe not able to monitor their social media interactions or their friend interactions. A child who is at a school who may not have the resources to provide counseling and adequate staff to kind of safeguard them, and individuals who have had prior abuse. A lot of times kids who are in the foster care system also experience trafficking as well. So, you know, I really think of like individuals who are highly vulnerable to trafficking are individuals who are in more desperate situations.
Yeah, man. Okay, so let's go back to how does a coffee shop fight that? I mean, it also seems like such a huge project, like that. I think a lot of people just think, well, it's just how the world is. Like I could never do anything. So walk us.
And I think, you know, when I think about social justice, I think so many issues fall in that category of being like, this is so huge, nothing I could do would make any kind of drop in the bucket. And I would challenge everyone to say, like, I don't think that's true. I think if everybody gave a little bit, we'd make a huge impact. And so in terms of what we do, we have three main priorities as an organization. The first one is to educate people about the issue. We want people to understand that it happens, first off. We want people to understand that it happens here in our city, in our communities. And we want people to understand, like, what are some steps they can take to do something about it. And so when you come into our shop, we have information on the walls about human trafficking. It's very surface level. It's not, we're not pulling our punches. We're not trying to soften things at all. But we also recognize that we want people to come back and learn more. And if people are depressed the first time they walk into our shop and never come back, that's not going to help anybody. So we try to keep it surface level. We train our baristas to be able to answer basic questions about human trafficking. But the real meat of what we do on the awareness front is that we hold awareness events in our shop on a regular basis to give people the opportunity to really go deeper with the subject matter and understand more how it intersects with their personal life and maybe what they can do about it. So we have had legislative briefings where we have organizations who come in who are working on legislation related to human trafficking come in and talk about those and how we can get our legislative officials to kind of support those measures. We have information sessions for teachers and parents and caregivers for them to understand what the red flags look like and how they can safeguard their kids. We've had information sessions for like doctors and nurses and medical professionals who might be on the front lines and who could spot red flags in their patients. Just a number of different things where people can learn more about the issue, understand how it intersects with their lives, and really get involved. So that's the first piece of what we do, is the awareness piece.
That's like the first piece. That's funny. The first piece. Okay.
That's one little thing. And then the second thing we do is really partner with other anti-trafficking groups. So we recognize that we are a small cog in a very big machine. We have to be working together and have to be working strategically and collaborating and talking to really make an impact. If we're all working in our little silos, doing our own little things, there's going to be a lot of people who fall through cracks. There's going to be a lot of duplicated services unnecessarily. And so we think it's really important that organizations are really coming together and talking about the issue. And so we provide our space for a place for organizations to come and get together and talk. We also have 12 allies that we support every year. Each organization kind of gets a month that we focus on them. We post on social media about them. We have a drink that all the profits are going to that organization. And we have their information all posted on our wall in our shop, and now also on our website, where people can go and learn about these other organizations and what they do, because no one organization can do it alone. We all have our specialty. We all know what we're doing in our specific area. And if we were to try to start doing everything, we would probably not do it very well. And so we really need to like work together to make sure that all the pieces fit together, and that we're doing the most effective and efficient work possible.
Yeah.
So that's the second one, is collaboration. And the third one is that we use our resources to support survivors once they have exited a trafficking situation. So when we initially started, that looked like us providing financial and in-kind donations to organizations who are working directly with clients. But then in 2018, we actually launched our own aftercare program, which is solely focused on employment development. And so we launched a program called Brazen Table, where we are working to provide job skills and culinary skills to survivors of trafficking. And so we recognize through our work with other organizations that one of the major barriers in survivors moving forward and really finding independence and being able to break free of kind of this cycle that often happens when somebody comes out of trafficking is that they needed dependable, sustainable employment. And because a lot of individuals have been trafficked at a younger age, they weren't able to get that. Along with the fact that a lot of them may have had a criminal background now associated with their trafficking. And so there were just, we knew that this was a really important thing to talk about. And so we were working 5 months with these individuals to talk about resume writing, how to find a job in the first place, how to apply for it, how to interview for it. Once you get the job, how to keep the job, like how to manage conflict in the workplace, how to problem solve around like, okay, my car broke down, I can't get to work. Okay, I need to call my boss first. This is what I need to say. Now I need to figure out how to get there, So how to problem solve around things like that, a lot of us have learned just by like having jobs when we were like 16, we've kind of learned those things. But then we also really focus on the culinary and hospitality side of things, where people, where our participants are learning things like knife skills and just basic cooking techniques and baking and customer service and things like that will enable them to get a job in the culinary industry, which in Houston is usually, not during COVID, it's one of the biggest culinary capitals in the world. And so we think it's a really great way to give people skills in jobs that normally exist to a high degree. So that's what we do. That's how a coffee shop fights human trafficking. And I'll also say that while our primary focus here in Houston is on sex trafficking and supporting survivors of sex trafficking, we recognize that is not the only form of trafficking, and that what we do makes an impact on trafficking around the world. So as consumers who are utilizing goods that are oftentimes made through trafficking or through trafficking individuals, like coffee and sugar and chocolate and a lot of like home goods and things like that, we ensure that those products that we purchase are ethically sourced or fair trade, or have some kind of certification that can verify that we are getting them through a trustable supply chain.
Yeah.
Trustworthy was probably the word I should have used.
That's okay.
So I'm kind of just curious maybe more specifics of sort of how people end up in it, right? And then how do they get out, right? So like, as an example this week, my son gets on the computer and he plays a game called Roblox. I hadn't heard of it until recently, but it's just kind of a video game and it's a portal, people, it's free. It's kind of like Minecraft, I guess. Anyway, and then my wife saw a post on Facebook, don't let your kids play Roblox because adults get on and groom kids. They start chatting through the game, and of course parents are all doing whatever and the kids playing the game. So they're, not monitoring it. So I'm going, well, is that an avenue where people find kids? Is it through social media? Is it through, familial situations? Is it? I even read a story a while back about, I think it was in Haiti, where I shouldn't say what country. I don't know what country, but it was a relatively poor country, and children were sold for very, very cheap. I mean, like $50, $100. It was shocking. I couldn't believe it. Anyway, so I'm interested how people really do fall into this, because it does seem so foreign to like my white middle class privileged situation. And then how do they get out? I mean, are there people that go in undercover? They work at the ship dock, and hey, you look like you're in trafficking. I can help you out. I mean, is it through those kinds of relationships? Is there like do we like hire people to go find them, private investigators? Anyway, so the kind of in and out is fascinating.
Yeah. That's a great question. So I will start by saying that every situation of human trafficking is different. Like you cannot talk to, hundreds of survivors and hear the same story twice. There are definitely common themes, but no story is the same. And so there are lots of different ways that people are tricked, lured, forced into human trafficking situations. And so some of those, like I mentioned, are exacerbated by individuals who are living in more desperate situations. And, I think about especially this teenage group who are highly vulnerable. You think back to when you were a teenager and what were you looking for in life? You were looking to be accepted, you were looking to be a part of something, and you were probably looking to be loved. And so I think a lot of times if kids are not able to find those things anywhere else, they're going to accept them from the places that they do come. And so what I would say is somebody, just as parents, we need to be thinking about our kids and ensuring they have a safe place to be who they are, that we will always accept them, always love them, always value them. And, we will do our part as parents to keep them safe on that side. I think also ensuring that who their friend groups are, who they're hanging out with, and who the parents of those friend groups are. I don't think that we as parents need to be fearful, but I think we just need to be aware of what our kids are doing, who they're talking to, who they're hanging out with, what they're doing online, who they might be chatting with online, because the internet is such a strange beast, right? There are so many great things about it, but there's also so much anonymity. And so, yes, an adult can most certainly act as though they're not an adult online and start buddying up with kids and try to lure them that way. And that does definitely happen. I think as parents or as caregivers, that we need to just teach our kids how to be safe online, how they should probably not be friends with people that they've never seen in person, or that they should not just start chatting with somebody randomly online. There are lots of different courses out there that can help parents really safeguard their kids online. And it's not a matter of taking freedoms away from your kids or not letting them do what everybody else is doing. It's just a matter of ensuring that they know how to protect themselves, and that we as parents and caregivers just have an idea of what they're doing. Because I think it's so easy. I mean, gosh, all the time I'm well, let me just pull out my phone and start scrolling through it and forget that my kids are right there. And it's just an easy thing to do now. And so just making sure that we're just aware as parents and how to keep our kids safe. But so kids can be lured in online. A story that you hear a lot is just a trafficker starts grooming an individual, and that can happen online. It can also happen in person. So they somehow meet this child or kid somehow meets this trafficking individual, this trafficker, right? And that can happen online. It can happen in person. It can happen over the phone. It can happen through mutual friends, and that trafficker starts grooming them. So trying to provide the thing that they may be lacking. So maybe they're lacking love. So this trafficker tells them that he loves them. Or maybe they're lacking, or they're really desperate for employment. And so this trafficker tells them that he has this great job for them, like modeling, and so there are all these different avenues that this trafficker can use. And traffickers tend to be very charismatic, very emotionally savvy to be able to manipulate their victims. And so once they have that individual hooked, it's a lot easier to control them and exploit them and make them do what they want to have them done. And so sometimes traffickers will continue to have to use other means to keep them submissive, but sometimes just that initial profession of love will do the trick and like get that individual in. Foreign nationals are a little bit different. So typically like those kinds of situations are happening to domestic individuals who are already living here, who already have some vulnerabilities that exist. For foreign individuals, it's a little bit different. They're often lured in with the promise of job or education. And then once they're here, they find out that that job or education is not what they expected. And so then they're kind of trapped that way. And oftentimes the traffickers will then use their immigration status and their papers and things like that to keep them kind of submissive. In terms of how individuals exit human trafficking, again, it can happen in a variety of ways. Sometimes people are able to escape on their own. Unfortunately, a lot of times they have been so manipulated that they don't even recognize themselves as a victim. They recognize themselves as someone who's complicit in this. And so they don't think of like escape being an option because they've chosen this for themselves. They're the ones who like, decided to be with this guy, or they're the ones who decided to go down this road. And so they kind of blame themselves. And so don't see, they don't see exit as a viable option. So sometimes there are individuals who recognize that they are being trafficked and they can escape, or they're able to escape. That doesn't happen a whole lot. It usually ends up being that there is somebody in the community who might recognize a red flag and call it in to the National Human Trafficking Hotline or the HPD line or the local helpline, and that resource is able to go out and to provide support and either arrest traffickers or provide resources to individuals who have been trafficked. So
what would the red flag be? Like you're in HEB and you see someone that looks like they sort of have a handler with them. Like that's what it is on Grey's Anatomy. So.
Yeah, well, one of the things I think that people should look out for is just kind of like if someone doesn't look like they have freedom of movement or freedom of voice. And so if it looks like they're being controlled in any way, that might just be a red flag. And so like if you think about, there are certain like industries in which labor trafficking happens to a higher level, and it tends to be like restaurants and hotels and motels and landscaping crews and construction crews. So if you notice like that these individuals are maybe being like bussed in and out together, like they're not like jumping in their car and heading home, they're like being taken from place to place, that can be a red flag. If they look like they are unable to like communicate with you freely, like if maybe they're looking over their shoulder, if they continue like, checking behind them or looking at a specific person while they're talking to you, that can be another red flag. What I like to tell people is that one way to fight human trafficking is just treating other people like humans. And so, like have a conversation with somebody. If you're thinking like this person might be being trafficked, just talk to them, like ask them questions, like ask them like where they're from, what they're doing. Like, I remember when I first started talking to different places about human trafficking, and there were a number of people, there were a number of people who were like, I think my nail salon is a place where trafficking is happening. And I was like, okay, probably not. However, have you talked to any of the people who are doing your nails? Ask them if they have questions, ask them if they have kids, ask them where their kids go to school, ask them, ask them questions. And if the more that we talk to each other and we treat people like human beings, not only if that person is being trafficked, they feel like somebody sees them and hears them and they're not invisible, but B, it also can give you peace of mind and like, okay, this person has kids who's going to the school over here, and and it just gives you an understanding of like, this person is just another human being who I don't have to be worried about being trafficked. So yeah, I think it's really important to just ensure that we are, treating others as we would want to be treated.
Yeah. I know that there are lots of things. My next question is going to be kind of what can we do to fight it aside from looking for those red flags. But if I remember correctly, you guys at least used to do something where you would take like baskets of like shampoo and conditioner and stuff to brothels or something. Is that something you still do?
That wasn't us. That was another organization. And I'm not sure that they still do that, but that was with Redeemed. Was it with Redeemed? I think it was with Redeemed Ministries. That was a long time ago. I'm not sure if they do that anymore, but it definitely was a space where you were able to make contact with individuals who were literally trapped in these places, and just like look them in the eye and hand them things that they needed. And so I think that there's so much to be said about the value of feeling human and known and noticed.
Yeah. I guess,
and
go ahead.
I forgot what I was going to say. It's okay.
I'm so sorry.
Okay.
I seem to remember somebody saying, and maybe I heard it wrong, that part of the idea behind that or something like that was that the enslavement is to the point where they're unable to even do things like buy certain hygiene products. And so then they're sort of like in debt, constantly in debt. They can't come out of that. And so if we can do something to kind of like even things so that they have some freedom in that way.
Yeah, true. That's true. In some of these places, in some of these places that front as massage parlors or cantinas, the individuals who are being trafficked there don't have access to anything, and so a lot of times they'll have to buy from like the company store is what's commonly referred to, and all these things are at exorbitant prices. And so, you know, how do they even have money to buy these things? But then also, like, if you're spending like $100 on a bottle of shampoo, like you are going to continue to be in debt to this person who's trafficking you.
Okay. Oh, golly, it's so dark and so terrible. I want to talk a little bit about some of the, like, when people walk into the coffee shop, they see a lot of stuff on the wall. It's done in this perfect way where it's like, it's weighty, but like you said, it's not such a downer, they don't come back, but it's enough to pique interest. Two things I'm curious about. One, it says in big red letters, slavery didn't end, something like with cotton picking in the South or whatever. So I want you to talk a little bit about this idea of it being slavery, because that's such a charged word. I mean, it does its job. But the other thing is like the logo. I've never figured out there's an eagle wings or something. So tell us a little bit about just some of the thought that went into like artwork and logo and that kind of thing.
Yeah. So we recognized that we did not want to overwhelm people when they walked into the shop with this heavy information that would just make them sick to their stomach and leave. We also recognize that, you know, survivors don't like to be portrayed as sad victims, right? They want to be portrayed and understood and known as survivors, as people who have like triumphed over this. And so we wanted to communicate that in the art that we did, that it wasn't like, we don't have pictures of like girls in chains or like somebody tied up, because that is not empowering to a survivor. What's empowering to a survivor is just, you know, to see like real information, but also the understanding that things can be done about this. And so we wanted to make our information visually appealing to people, so it would get their attention, so that they would be drawn in by that information and then be able to go deeper into the subject matter. So yeah, we have lots of those types of things around the room. And traditionally, you know, human trafficking has been referred to as modern day slavery for as long as I can remember. One thing that we're talking about as an organization is to kind of reframe that, to ensure we're not diminishing the hurt and the pain and the trauma of the Black community who have this slavery in their history. And so we're rethinking the way that we use the terminology, the imagery, and all of that that's kind of like wrapped up with this dark history of America, and really focusing on like the issue as it is right now. So we're in the process of doing that. I think it will kind of probably be over the course of a year where we kind of reframe our messaging around that. But yeah, and then the second question you asked, I am drawing a blank on it. The logo, yes. Okay, so our logo is a phoenix, and I actually was so fortunate to have one of my very good friends on our founding board who is a graphic designer. I mean, that is huge. And so I would have never understood the power of graphic design. It is so powerful. And, you know, we were just talking about like what I envisioned for a second cup. And so really what I wanted was that we provided a place where survivors could recognize their true value and worth and become what they were intended to be prior to their exploitation. And so my good friend, Michelle Coffey.
Wait, her last name is Coffey?
Her last name is Coffee. It is, I mean, it was meant to be.
Yeah.
And she came up with this idea of a phoenix rising from the ashes. And, you know, the idea of something beautiful coming out of something so dark is just so powerful. And when you look at most phoenixes, they are very flowy and colorful. And so ours looks a little bit different. It has very straight edges. It looks like very tough. And that's because we wanted to ensure that it's not just this like flowy, feely thing, but we're here to like, you know, we're here to crush human trafficking. We're here to fight it. And so we wanted to have like a very strong presence.
Yeah,
And
it works. And
thanks.
you guys, I don't know if you have your own font, but that font is like in my mind now. If I ever see that font, I'm like, oh, a second cup.
Yep. That is one of the great things about if you have really good branding is that people associate your organization with fonts, with colors, with imagery. So yes, Michelle Coffey did a fantastic job. So yeah.
If someone's out there listening and they're like, what are they talking about? I want to see it. It's A2 NDCUP, asecondcup.com.
Yes, that's correct. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'm looking at it right now. It's a beautiful website. And
Thanks.
yeah. I remember hearing a while back, and I just pulled up a stat. This is from a big website, an anti-porn website called fightthenewdrug.org. So I just kind of looked this up. I'm not, saying I've like peer reviewed it with, 5 other scholars like that, but there's an article that you can easily find there. And anyway, somewhere along the way, I just read this stat that talked about the number of people in pornography that, are actually trafficked into it. Now they define trafficking as basically like kind of making a person do something they don't want to do. So it's not necessarily the extreme, say someone being kidnapped and, forced into something. It might be someone who's already engaged in pornography. But then while in that business, they do things that they're not comfortable doing. But that said, here's just one stat, for example. According to anti-trafficking nonprofit Rescue Freedom, in 9 countries, 49% of sexually exploited women said that pornography was made of them while they were being sold for sex. In other words, they were unwilling participants in pornography. And I'm wondering too, because you talked about ways that people get trapped into trafficking, and I would think that someone videoing you would be a pretty powerful tool that someone could hang over you and be like, "What are you going to do? We have you on video." Is that a technique that's employed? And would that be a pretty good reason for the casual person not to engage in porn? Because when we think about porn, we think of it as like, oh, it's just adults having fun, and there's no harm involved. But if a significant percentage, and I don't know if those are stories you hear, are actually somehow involved in pornography, then you're participating basically in trafficking if you're giving money to it.
Yeah. Pornography is a really touchy, controversial issue, and but I will say that I don't know the specific statistics in terms of like the number of individuals who are doing pornography who are trafficked or forced into doing that, or the number who have inadvertently been filmed and then trafficked as a result of that. High statistics would not surprise me. I think that there are a number of ways that pornography can feed into human trafficking. And one of the biggest ways is that it diminishes the stigma associated with dehumanizing a person for sexual pleasure. And I think that the more we are exposed to that kind of thing, where somebody is no longer really a human being, but they are somebody, or they're an object that brings me pleasure, the more I do that, and the more I do that, the more desensitized I am, and the more I want to do that. And there are scientific studies that show that it's an addictive behavior, and that as individuals engage in that kind of behavior, they continue to need more and more and more to have that same kind of stimulation that they did in the beginning when they maybe interacted with less. And so I think that is one way that it contributes to human trafficking. It enables an individual to remove somebody's humanity, right?
Mm-hmm.
And first it's just in pictures, but then if you've removed all of the women on your screen, all the humanity from the women on your screen, then how much are you able to do that with a woman who's standing in front of you? And so I think that's a really big way that pornography feeds into human trafficking. I also think the idea of like somebody, you know, maybe it's a college student who was like, I just need to pay my bills this month. I need to, you know, make sure I can buy my books. And so I'm just going to do this thing this one time. And then somebody can hold that over her and use it against her and trap her in a trafficking situation. I mean, that's a huge thing, you know, and that's another really important thing to think about as parents and caregivers. Is just teaching your kids that once something is on the internet, it is on the internet forever, and it can be accessed by almost anybody. And so if you don't want something out there, don't put it out there. And also, like, if it gets out there, I as a parent will still love you and still take care of you and still value you. So it's kind of like that both and, you know, like, don't put it out there, but if you do, I will still love you.
Well, these days with the cloud, you don't even have to, quote, put it out there. I won't take too much time with this, but I was approached several years ago online by a guy who, it turns out that someone had gotten some pictures of me that I never put online. They were just on my phone. They weren't anything naughty. They were just selfies or whatever, and used them to catfish this guy out of his entire retirement. And he had my picture like in frames around his house, this poor guy. Crazy. So like not even, and again, it wasn't human trafficking, it wasn't anything, it was just someone scamming this guy. But they were just pictures I had on my phone that I was like, that one's not cute, I won't put it on Facebook. And then bam, so insane. Let me ask you this. You said something earlier about Houston being a culinary capital, and that a lot of people get funneled into like sort of re-entry looks like getting jobs in the culinary arena. But with the pandemic, I'm guessing that that's really, I mean, not only can people maybe not come to your coffee shop the same way, but that gets affected. So talk about how the pandemic is affecting human trafficking, but also how it's affecting like y'all's work.
Yeah. I mean, the pandemic has just been rough for everybody on like every single level. And that is also true for A Second Cup. So I'll talk about our organization first, and then I'll get into how it's impacted human trafficking. So for us, we have, since the beginning, our model, I think is great. I'm a little biased, but I think it's great because we usually have this part of our organization that generates a very large percentage of our overall operating expenses. You know, most nonprofit organizations have to write grants and solicit donations, and they depend on those to be able to do the work they do. And we do those things as well, but it's really just to fund about 30 to 40% of our overall operating expenses. The coffee shop itself generates everything else.
Really? Wow.
Yes. And so we have this, you know, this great thing in normal times. It's this great thing that funds almost everything we do. And unfortunately, just like all small business retailers, or almost all of them, especially restaurants, have just been pummeled by the pandemic. And so, you know, we've been seeing probably our revenues drop by about 60%. Which really limits what we're able to do. And we've had to, you know, decrease our staff size, we've decreased our hours. And so it's been a very, very rough year, just in terms of like how we fund ourselves.
And I've seen like tables set up outside. Are people dining inside at all, or is it just outside?
We've maintained curbside and to-go orders only. We want to ensure the safety of our staff and the community. And, you know, until we get to levels in Houston where there's not this like crazy community spread, we feel like it's our job to just stay as safe as possible. So we've set up some tables outside so people can enjoy their beverages and food out there. But for the most part, it's just to go only. People can come in and order, but they then can also leave as soon as they get their stuff. So our sales have really, really taken a hit, just like every other restaurant across the city.
Okay, but when people talk about supporting local, if you're listening to this podcast, if you just want some food and you want to support your local, restaurants, great. But if you want to support your local coffee shop and fight human trafficking, go spend a ton of money curbside at a Second Cup.
Yes.
It's a fun place.
Yes. Yes,
Yeah.
and we still have a lot of our merchandise available for sale, and so as people are waiting for their drinks, they can peruse our merchandise, which is all either ethically sourced, made by survivors, or made by vulnerable populations. And so it not only benefits us, it also benefits artisans around the world who are trying to stay on their feet as well. So it's like triply good.
And it's really good stuff. Like I get caught at that jewelry section every time, and I have a candle in my house. Like it's good. It's dangerous. Only
good stuff.
Yes, everyone go spend a lot of money at a Second Cup. But continue about how the pandemic.
Yeah. So we have the financial aspect is obviously very, very challenging, but also a lot of our work happens in person, and so all of this awareness that we raise throughout the year is just come to a screeching halt, pretty much, because we can't have people in the shop. And so we've tried to convert a lot of that to a digital format. We've been posting a lot on social media about the issue. We've kind of expanded our awareness to really look at issues that intersect with human trafficking, like poverty and criminal justice system and racial equity and all those kinds of things that intersect with human trafficking. We've tried to really shine a light on that and get awareness out about human trafficking and how it intersects with these things. So a lot of our awareness has gone online, which has been challenging, but great challenge. And then our culinary training program can also not happen because it's also in person. And so we were going to relaunch the program. We kind of did some really cool things to shorten the time frame that we would do the training to be able to get our graduates into employment with us sooner. So they were going to be working in our catering business. And then we had lots of ideas about how this was going to move forward. It was supposed to relaunch in May of this year, and that was not able to happen because of the pandemic. And so we've converted also to a digital format of that. So we've recorded videos. We are getting together kits that have like pots and pans and measuring spoons and knives and all these things that people would use to do the program along with the videos. And they'll be able to do those in their own homes or in relationship with one of our other service providers. And so we're working on getting all of that information into the hands of survivors as soon as possible. But yeah, literally the pandemic has changed everything we do. We also have our annual fundraiser coming up.
Yeah, segue to that. Yeah.
Which is, it's going to be really fun. It's usually a really super fun event where we feature local chefs from all over Houston, and you get to taste their food and vote on your favorite, and there's a silent auction, all these fun things. It is not your traditional gala. It's much more like interactive. You're up and walking around and trying things the whole time. That is also it's going to be virtual. And we have some great chefs lined up, which I can't tell you yet because we're making the announcement on Saturday, but some really, really great chefs lined up for that, where we will be providing every purchaser, everybody who purchases a ticket, a box of prepared ingredients to be able to cook alongside the chefs throughout the event. So it should be a really fun, different kind of experience. And tickets will go on sale for that event next week. So that's a really great way to support us as well. And also a way that we've been impacted.
I mean, that could just be a date night, or a group of friends in a big kitchen, like, let's go, y'all. We're going to learn how to make something really, it's going to be fancy food, right? It's not going to be
Yes, it'll be fancy food. It's going to be delicious. I can't wait. Some amazing chefs. It'll just be a really fun event. And it happens to be on our 5th birthday as a brick and mortar. So it's very birthday centric. So it should be really fun.
And this episode is not going to air till after Saturday. So if you wanted to say who is going to come, you could. I'm just saying.
It won't air?
It won't air.
Okay. So our main course chef is going to be Chris Shepard, who was named Best Chef in the World in 2019.
What?
So you want to be a part of it.
That's insane. Wow.
Yeah.
We're going live. No, I'm kidding. I didn't.
Yeah, so it should be really exciting, really fun. Also a number of other great chefs who are going to be.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And and if people want to do that, where do they, let's just get it all out there. Where do they go?
Yeah, you can go to our website, secondcup.com, so a2ndcup.com, and there is a local fair tab at the very top. You click on that, all the information's there. If you want to sponsor the event, you can most certainly do that, or you can just buy a ticket and show up. It's going to be super fun, different. I feel like I think it's going to be really fun.
Okay.
So, yeah. And in terms of how the pandemic is impacting trafficking, so we haven't really seen any statistics in terms of whether or not trafficking has increased or decreased during this time. But what I will say is, because human trafficking relies so heavily on individuals who are in desperate situations, this pandemic, the longer it goes on, is creating more desperate people who are losing their jobs, people who are being evicted, people who are losing their income because of medical expenses. I mean, there are just so many things that are going to put people in very, very desperate situations. And so, unfortunately, we will have a lot more individuals who will be needing services very soon. and are much more vulnerable to human trafficking. So we definitely anticipate moving forward that we will have more victims, and hopefully not too long after that, more survivors that will need services as well.
Oh my gosh, it's like doubly depressing. I mean, it's more people potentially being sucked into this, and then, not as much money to fight it. So again, go get some coffee today. I don't know exactly what day this is airing, but it's always a good day for coffee and looking at pretty things. And
that's right.
People love stories. So I don't know. I didn't tell you ahead of time we were doing this, so maybe you don't have anything ready, but do you have maybe one or two stories of just like successful moments, like someone that came through that just really kind of caught your heart, or like you just never thought that they would get out of it and then they did, or I don't know, something like that you could share with us?
Yeah, I have a lot of stories actually just with all aspects of our mission. So one of my favorites in terms of awareness is an individual who kind of started following us when we first got started, like 8 or 9 years ago. And he ended up quitting his job here, moving to Cambodia to work with an anti-trafficking group, then coming back volunteering with a Second Cup so that he could learn how to run a coffee shop, so that he could open a coffee shop there to provide jobs for individuals who had come out of trafficking.
Wow.
Like, that's awesome, right? And so it was really special to be a part of his story. In terms of, I had a very special conversation with a woman who came in, and she said that she had been coming in for a while, and she got introduced to me as I was sitting there in the shop doing my work, and came over and was like, hey, I just wanted to say thank you for the work that you're doing, because I was trafficked, and when I came in here and read the information on the walls and saw so many people here supporting the cause, I realized that people cared about individuals like me. And I was like crying, like it was just like so moving and so awesome to know that, that somebody was touched in that way. And frankly, if that was all I had done in my whole life, I might feel like, all right, done. But then also, like when we do our culinary training program, one of the coolest things for me is, a lot of the people that we work with have cooked in their homes before, but there have been some individuals who have never prepared a meal from scratch before. And so to see the level of like pride and confidence they have when they're like, I took these ingredients and I made this thing that I can eat, and it tastes good. It's really cool to see somebody like so proud of creating something from nothing. So
yeah. I mean, as we come to we still have a few minutes left, but before we end, I know people are going to be wondering, okay, so other than going and buying a crap ton of coffee from a Second Cup, which you should all do, what else can people do to fight human trafficking? I mean, I know that Houston is a hub. You hear that all the time. I don't quite know what that means. Maybe you can explain that. But then what can they do aside from buying coffee and coming to the fundraiser?
Yeah. So Houston as a hub basically means that we are considered a hotspot for human trafficking. And that's because we have, I-10 is the major route that traffickers use to transport their victims from place to place across the United States, and it goes right through the middle of our city. We have a very diverse labor force here, which is, I think, one of the coolest things about Houston, but it also allows international traffickers and victims to kind of just blend into the rest of society. Like, if somebody walked by me and was speaking a different language and wearing maybe different clothing than I would not even question it. I'd be like, oh yeah, we're in Houston, of course. But if I was living in the Midwest where that never happened to me, I might be like, oh, I wonder what their story is. I wonder what they're doing here. I might just ask a few more questions. We also have a very large city where people travel to come to conferences or events or sporting events or what have you. And typically when large groups of people are traveling for an event, trafficking tends to increase. So there are just a number of things that kind of make us a ripe place for human trafficking, unfortunately. I will also say there are a number of organizations working together to fight this too. So I also would say that we're a hub of anti-trafficking strategy and action here in Houston as well. In terms of what individuals can do, I think the first one is to educate yourself and make sure that you are getting and sharing good information. I think right now there's just a lot of garbage out there being shared that is untrue, that is like harmful to our anti-trafficking movement overall. And so making sure that you do research on the issue. If you see something that is like jarring and you want to share it, maybe check sources first, or maybe check with an organization that is reputable before you share it. Because the last thing we want to do is to share conspiracy theories that are not true and thereby just diminish our impact overall. So make sure you're educating yourself, getting good information, sharing good information. Some organizations that I find that are particularly reputable are the Polaris Project, Love 146, International Justice Mission. We also have a frequently asked questions section on our website that you're more than welcome to explore. I know as somebody who works in an anti-trafficking organization, I would welcome questions about like, hey, is this real? Should I share this? Should I be worried about this? Yeah, I would totally welcome that. So educate yourself, share that information with others to make sure that people know about it. I would say also be a conscious consumer, like know where your goods are coming from. A very, very large swath of human trafficking is labor trafficking. And so just make sure that you're looking into supply chains. And you can start small. It doesn't have to be like everything that you do, but like maybe start small. Like we started with chocolate in our household because we really like chocolate. And so we decided, okay, if we're gonna buy chocolate, it's gonna be fair trade. And we started small and then we kept growing and we continue to grow. Not everything I buy is fair trade, I know that. But I'm continuously trying to grow them. And give financially to organizations who are doing this work or doing work in areas that contribute to human trafficking. And vote. Voting is important. I'm not going to tell you who to vote for, what to vote for, but vote.
Yeah, for sure. And it is, I mean, I feel inspired, always feel inspired when I talk to you, but just the thing you said earlier about like, if everyone thinks, oh, I'm just going to be a small drop in the bucket, but if we all do a lot, and I mean, so going and buying some coffee, I actually don't drink coffee, but I think I'm one out of like 4 people in all of America that don't drink coffee. Everyone drinks coffee. So go and get a cup of coffee and know that you're contributing to something good, especially during this time. We've got to wrap it up, but I want to just ask, like, if people want to know more, if they want to do more, you've already said some small things they can do. They can go to a second cup. If they have some really like hard pressing questions, do you have like you said you have FAQ, or is there a place on the website to ask, or do you want to get like
on the website?
Okay, perfect. All right. Any final thoughts before we kind of close this out?
I will say that just on that note, like I really truly believe that everybody can do something, even if it's small, it matters. And so don't be afraid of this giant topic of human trafficking because you feel like there's nothing you can do. Like you can do something, and even if it's just buying fair trade chocolate, or even if it's just buying a coffee from a second cup, like you can do something.
Yeah. Oh, I just thought of another great question we didn't get time for, but I'll ask you after the recording just for my own. But thank you for listening. Thank you for joining us today on Theology on Air. And as always, we encourage you between now and next time we are sort of together to question freely, think deeply, and disagree as needed.